Hello everyone, welcome to Diplomatic Briefing. On July 4th, Wang Yi, member of the Political Bureau of the CPC Central Committee and Foreign Minister, was asked about the Iran nuclear issue and the current situation in the Middle East while jointly meeting the press with French Foreign Minister Stéphane Séjourné in Paris. Foreign media have noted that Wang Yi, in a rare move, harshly criticized the United States for brazenly bombing the nuclear facilities of a sovereign country, saying this has set a dangerous precedent. If a nuclear disaster were to occur, the whole world would have to pay the price. Wang Yi stated that the Iran nuclear issue could have served as an example of resolving international disputes through dialogue and negotiation, but now it is instead triggering a new round of crisis in the Middle East. Although the world has already heard the knock of peace at the door, in the end, it was unable to open the door to peace. China deeply regrets this, and the lessons from it warrant serious reflection. Wang Yi said that China's position on the Iran nuclear issue has always been clear and consistent. China attaches importance to the repeated public commitments made by Iran's supreme leader that Iran will not develop nuclear weapons, while also respecting Iran's right, as a signatory to the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, to peacefully use nuclear energy. On this basis, the relevant parties can accelerate negotiations for a new international agreement to resolve the Iran nuclear issue, and place all of Iran's nuclear activities under the strict supervision and safeguards of the International Atomic Energy Agency. He emphasized that the path to peace lies right before us, and history will test the sincerity of all parties. Wang Yi said that the recent military conflict between Israel and Iran should not be repeated. War cannot solve the Iran nuclear issue. Preemptive strikes clearly lack legitimacy, and the abuse of force will only trigger more conflicts and accumulate more hatred. The United States brazenly bombing the nuclear facilities of a sovereign country sets a dangerous precedent. If it leads to a nuclear disaster, the whole world will pay the price. The so-called notion of strength first, peace later is just the logic of might makes right. If we judge right and wrong solely by strength, then where are the rules? Where is justice? Strength alone cannot bring true peace, it is more likely to open Pandora's box. How should countries without strength, especially small and medium-sized nations, conduct themselves? Are they simply supposed to be put on the table, left to be carved up at will? Wang Yi emphasized that a true resolution of the Iranian nuclear issue cannot avoid the core issue of the Middle East, which is the Palestinian question. The humanitarian disaster in Gaza should not be allowed to continue, the Palestinian issue must not be marginalized again, and the legitimate aspirations of the Arab people should be fulfilled as soon as possible. The just voices of the broader Islamic world must be taken seriously. He said that the two-state solution is the only realistic way out of the Middle East turmoil, and the international community should take more concrete and effective actions to achieve this. Wang Yi emphasized that as permanent members of the UN Security Council, China and France should uphold justice, act responsibly, support resolving conflicts through dialogue and negotiation, oppose any form of double standards, and determine their own positions and policies based on facts and right and wrong. The United Nations and the Security Council should play their due role in promoting peace. China is willing to work together with France to make unremitting efforts toward this goal. Recently, there have been signs of easing in the China-US tariff war, yet during his trip to Europe, Wang Yi spoke out in unusually strong terms to sharply criticize the United States. There are a few observations that can be made. First, it is foreseeable that China-US relations will remain unstable, and this instability is caused by Trump's own shifts and bullying tactics. Second, Wang Yi chose to make his statement at a public press conference in Europe. Despite all the talk about justice and morality, the US attack on Iran clearly violated the sovereignty of another country, yet European nations didn't even dare to speak out in opposition. The same goes for the Palestinian issue. Europe points fingers at China, talking about the Taiwan issue and human rights, but when civilians are killed in Gaza every day, Europe simply turns a blind eye. Third, Wang Yi's statement also serves as a warning to the world: if US bullying is allowed to continue unchecked, Iran won't be the only victim. The consequences of bombing nuclear facilities are something the entire world will have to pay for. In addition, both the US House and Senate have passed the big and beautiful act proposed by Trump, and Trump chose to sign it on July 4th, America's Independence Day, to coincide with his narrative of making America great again. However, many economic experts have pointed out that this will further exacerbate the US fiscal deficit and debt risks. But even before Americans start to feel the risks, Trump's signing ceremony has already scared many Americans. According to live footage from CNN, surrounded by Republican members of Congress, military personnel, and their families, Republican Speaker of the House Mike Johnson then took a gavel out of his briefcase and handed it to Trump. As Johnson presented it with both hands, he said to Trump, "Mr. President, this is the gavel used to pass the big and beautiful act. I want to give it to you, hoping you can keep it as a memento." According to a report by PBS on July 3, when the bill was finally passed, it was this very gavel that was used. Many of the Republican lawmakers gathered around the two quickly let out sounds of sudden realization, cheering and applauding. When Trump heard this, he was overjoyed. He took the gavel and said to those around him, "Friends, are you ready?" He then picked up the gavel and enthusiastically banged it a few times on the table. After putting it down, a delighted Trump said to the crowd, "Hope you all have a great time." Mainland China's Observer Network cited the scene, saying it could only be described as a real-time survival guide on how to maximize the boss's emotional value. Meanwhile, critics within the United States pointed out that this scene was nothing short of a collapse of faith in the American system of separation of powers. On July 4, the American news site Reuters reported that the video from the scene caused an uproar on the internet. Netizens were all shocked, exclaiming that under Trump's rule, the U.S. legislative branch actually bowed down to the executive branch, which is supposed to be its equal. On social media, there were also many heartbroken and critical comments. Some netizens said that the so-called government structure of separation of powers and checks and balances is nothing more than that. History will not, and should not, record this moment with leniency. Some netizens believe that the president doesn't care about the specifics of any bill, nor does he care about any laws. He now stands above the law and the rules, and all department and federal agency heads obey his every command. This is just the latest example. Others think that this scene is clear proof that Trump has already extended his influence into Congress, believing that Johnson has handed the gavel over to Trump. This scene is highly symbolic and carries significant political meaning. It is not merely a ceremonial gesture, rather, it highlights a widespread perception. Even if Johnson's authority as Speaker is not directly controlled by Trump's agenda and demands, it is still deeply influenced by them. Some Americans have sarcastically remarked that Congress is no longer an institution on equal footing with the other branches of government. So why is this so symbolic? One netizen responded, saying that rather than calling it a symbol, it's more of a reality. Congress is already useless. Philip Kosky, a former U.S. federal prosecutor and editor-in-chief of the liberal media outlet MediaTouch Network, also mocked that on January 20th of this year, Congress had already abandoned its function as an independent branch and was shirking all its oversight responsibilities. In this way, Johnson handing over the gavel to the executive branch actually seems perfectly natural. Some people lamented that at this point, all that's left is for the Supreme Court to hand over its gavel as well. The conclusion is that Trump's display of individualism shows the world that the moral high ground the U.S. used to boast about is long gone, and in fact, this has dealt a huge blow to America's soft power.